Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks on News That Matters. This time it's China, and China is worried. I'm going to start with some news that I collected together about various different aspects of China and what is happening within that country right next to India. Start with Xi Jinping. He's staring at a third term coming in sometime around November with the 20th Party Congress, which is going to take place around that time. There is speculation whether he will come back or not. That's only time will tell. Personal opinion, I think he will. How is something that we will discuss during the course of this video. Xi Jinping, on his recent visit to Wuhan, said that the China as a country will press on with its zero COVID policies despite the economic loss and distress that is causing to the nation, because he feels this particular policy has more benefits than drawbacks. There's a close ally of Xi Jinping, and I'm going to apologize right here for probably not pronouncing the names very properly. It's Wang Xiaohong, who's now the China's new public security chief, sort of a home minister for China. This, to a large extent, by a lot of China watchers, is being looked at as consolidation of power by Xi Jinping before the 20th Party Congress. China once again is facing a sort of a wave of the COVID and has placed about 1.7 million people under lockdown in a province called Anhui. The authorities, it seems, have reported about 300 cases on Monday, and there are news trickling out about some 50 odd cases reported in another province about southeast of this particular region. One of the things that the backlash of the zero COVID policy was that the China's economic downturn basically switched across like a self-inflicted wound to Xi Jinping. And this is not being said by me. This is being said by the SCMP and Asia Nikki. The questions with regards, as I said in the beginning of this episode, with regards his return onto power as the head of China are rife. A lot of people, analysts, are on two ends. One end talks about Xi Jinping finding it difficult to come back into power. The second end talks about Xi Jinping coming back into power, but not having the amount of power that he had this time around. So there might be some changes, only time will tell. These are all speculations at the end of it. There is a meeting which happens in China in a small resort town which is close to or east of Beijing. It's called the Beidaihe town, where the top echelons of the Chinese Communist Party get together in sort of an informal mode and discuss various different things. In one of my episodes where I was speaking to someone from Taiwan, Professor Shen, he mentioned that when the India standoff started off, Xi Jinping had got a lot of flack from the elders of the party during the Beidaihe meeting in 2020. Interesting news that came out of this particular region is the Tesla cars are supposed to be banned and not allowed entry from July 1st within this region. China doesn't really specify what date this particular meeting will happen. It happens in a period of about 30 days from when it is announced. It's sort of a summer retreat meeting that takes place between the CCP. Tesla cars are being accused of spying and have the capability of spying on various activities and are being banned within that region. Xi Jinping, as I said, was in Wuhan, and last week he was also in Hong Kong to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the so-called return of Hong Kong into China's hands. A Hong Kong legislator who appeared in a photo with Xi Jinping has tested positive during his return or post Xi Jinping's return from Hong Kong. The gentleman's name is Steve Ho. He's a legislator and a pro-government Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong. So that's his party. He says that he had tested positive for COVID and is self-isolating. Xi Jinping's visit to Hong Kong was surrounded by a lot of preparation, as he was nobody who went close to him was allowed to do so without having gone through a rigorous quarantine schedule, including children. And he didn't even stay in Hong Kong. He, as a matter of fact, stayed somewhere outside Hong Kong and came back the next morning to continue his visit. That was noticed by a lot of people. There is also speculation rife about the group that he had carried to Hong Kong, which featured some new faces. And there is some speculation, as I read in the SEMP, about the new faces of the new government, which probably will get formed under Xi Jinping post November. Let's look at the economy. As we all know, the Chinese real estate has been in the dumps for the past some time, with the Evergrande and multiple other companies going, coming close to default, and some even actually defaulting. China's Central China Real Estate Limited is offering to pay farmers as much as $24,000 for their wheat to offset down payments for homes in its in its one of its projects in the Hainan province. One of the things that we are noticing in the real estate sector is that the lack of fluidity of capital, as well as the overburdening of themselves with regards loans and grants and production of ghost cities, has led this particular sector down into the dump. Goldman Sachs talks about 22 more large real estate companies going into defaults or major economic troubles in the coming year. There is a analyst called Kenneth Ho and Shaki Ting who work from Goldman Sachs. They wrote a report which talks about they raised the for 22 China property half-year default forecast to about 31.6%. So the default is that high. How is it going to happen? And let me actually add that the previous year's default was about 19%. So what we saw in terms of the Evergrande crisis is probably just the tip of the iceberg. The economic crisis has brought out Li Keqiang, who's the premier of China, from sort of hibernation and semi-retirement, if I may say that. He's been talking about revival of the economy, and he did that within a forum that he had held with about 100,000 Chinese Communist Party officials in Beijing about a month and a half ago. He's come out and said that the youth unemployment ratio for those aged between 16 to 24 has gone up to a record high of 18.4% in May, and that is very, very high for China, for a country that is talking about actually going on the fast pace or fast track of development. The impact of all these little things I will discuss in another video, where we actually analyze with somebody who knows a little more about China than I do. There's a study that also talks about the Chinese economists are trying to learn from what the Russians have done prior to the invasion of Ukraine to kind of protect their economy from Western sanctions, and are trying to look at various methods to adopt within their economy as and when they conduct their military operations within Taiwan. Let's talk about foreign affairs for a little bit. We all know that the BRICS summit went through some time back. Pakistan got sort of a black face by not being, called for that high-level developmental council. And the rumor has it both Russia and China had signed off on India's request of not involving Pakistan. The Chinese obviously want to expand BRICS as a counter to the Western alliance, and this presents a pretty tough call for India, because BRICS is more or less a Chinese initiative. With its economy being where it is today, it kind of occupies about 30 or 35% of the entire BRICS economies. They had put out a statement during the summit that they would be looking at the expansion. Now, when India actually favors such an expansion, it's kind of a win for China. That's something which is a tightrope walk for India, and I'm sure the diplomats within our country are looking at it very carefully and seeing how to react to it. Let's look at Taiwan. USA and Taiwan are all set to hold their first round of trade talks, and that's going to burn China a little bit, considering a lot of the rhetoric, especially coming out of the G7 and the NATO summit, where China was called as a systemic challenge to this part of the world. Chinese economy is going to set to get a little bit of a setback from its southern provinces, which is experiencing one of the largest floods in 7 decades, as reported by the Premier Li Keqiang as well. China has been facing these flood challenges for the past 2, 3 years, and it is pretty much getting worse day by day. It takes off a huge amount of their infrastructure, their fields, and of course, a whole lot of the investment that the Chinese government would have made in those regions. How this will unfold in the future with more and more climate change happening is something that we will see. As far as a little bit towards Myanmar is concerned, that there was a rumor or a report, I can't confirm, that there was a bit of a spillover of a little action that was taking place on somewhere one of the border districts of Myanmar and China, which has caused a little bit of a stress within Beijing. I don't know if the visit of the Chinese State Council and the Foreign Minister Wang Yi to Myanmar is in the same respect. But what we see is the Chinese actually putting out statements, and I quote, China sincerely hopes that Myanmar will enjoy political and social stability and its people will live a happy and fulfilling life, and that the country will realize development and rejuvenation. It also said, he also said, and I quote, China expects all parties in Myanmar to prioritize the big picture and interests of the people, adhere to rational consultation, and realize political reconciliation, along with lasting peace, stability at an early date within the framework of the constitution and laws. This I'm reading out to you from the readout that was put out by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. It's interesting. This coup happened in February last year, and the Chinese have pretty much supported it, called it an internal political shift, has been doing business with it, and has been actually wanting to promote the Myanmar China economic corridor, which brings the Chinese to the Bay of Bengal with the Myanmarese port of Kai Fu. The Chinese seem to be holding pretty strong in their efforts towards Myanmar, but there seems to be a little bit of a change of tone with regards their outlook to Myanmar. The Chinese economists are pretty scared looking at the outflow of Western tech companies from China post the Russian special military operation in Ukraine, or invasion in Ukraine, or war in Ukraine, as you'd like it. And the Chinese are looking at this particular thing with big concern, because China depends on these Western tech companies for its own work as well. One of the funniest news that we saw was that in the Chinese budget, the Chinese were planning to change some 30 million computers within the Chinese government with stuff that was made locally within China. A huge cost to pay to be self-reliant. And that is something that, interestingly, China has been talking about, self-reliance in a lot of things. Food being one of the biggest cry points within the Chinese administration, because they all have sort of a flowback memory of the great famines of the 60s and the 50s, after those big revolutions carried out by Mao Zedong. Looking at food, China emerged as the top buyer of Indian rice during the pandemic, and even in the last year, with a growth of about 7.7% between 21-22. Let's see what's going to happen in the next year, because the Chinese are reportedly trying to increase their stock reserves of food items within their country. I don't know what they're preparing for. Some experts say it's war. Some experts say that it is their inhibit, fear of running out of food, which keeps them to keep higher stockpiles. The Chinese food manufacturers, and I'm going to continue with food for a little bit, but this concerns national security for the United States. They bought about 300 acres of land next to a place called Grand Forks in North Dakota. It's about 20 minutes drive from the Grand Forks Air Force Base of the United States Air Force, raising a huge concern in terms of national security, spying, electronic warfare, and so on and so forth. The Chinese and Russians have actually increased their oil trade to a large extent, and that has actually forced the Iranians, which are supposed to be very close to the Chinese, to discount their already cheap crude oil to be on the forefront of the Chinese lists in terms of purchasing their fuel. An interesting thing that actually took place, and this is not much of a newsbreaker, it's just something that I found and I found very interesting. There's a Taiwanese university student called Joseph Wen. He just graduated with a degree in music, but in the past 2 years, he spent online trying to research People's Liberation Army, Air Force, and Navy sites all across mainland China. And this young man has been able to map out 1,500 sites on a very interactive map that you can actually check out online. I did. It's very, very interesting. It shows pretty much all the development that we've been talking about in various different shows in my channel and many other channels on YouTube and the mainstream media with regards to the construction of Chinese bases along the line of control. Japan seems to have had a little bit of a scare from the Chinese and Russians, where a couple of days ago, a Chinese frigate sailed inside the Japanese contiguous zone in close to the Senkaku Islands. The Chinese call this Dwaiyu. This is quite critical because this particular set of islands are supposed to be one of the flashpoints between the Japanese and the Chinese. And this island falls in the first island chain. They're bit northeast of Taiwan, so it's a bit of a contentious area as it is. The Japanese protested against the Russian and Chinese conducting aggressive patrols within this disputed regions. Of course, I am sure some of you would know, and I'd like to state here that there is something known as the Northern Territories of Japan, which is a disputed area between Russia and Japan as well. Looking at Bangladesh, there are questions being asked between the Bangla society, within the Bangla elite and the media, where is China gradually bringing Bangladesh into its debt trap? And this, I am saying, is because of a couple of things. One, which saw the Bangladeshis procuring a huge amount of defense ware from the Chinese. They bought some frigates, which were 053H3 frigates, K8W fighter aircraft. These are trainer slash light attack aircraft. They bought them from the Chinese just about a couple of years ago. And both these systems, along with many other in terms of guns and so on and so forth, are developing technical snags. One of the biggest things about Chinese armed or armed forces equipment is the factor that the Chinese do not allow the purchasing country to buy and repair spares which they would need during operations. The Chinese kind of force it within the contract, wherein Chinese nationals or Chinese technicians would be based within that country doing the repairs and maintenance for the host country itself. In the same line, the Chinese have also offered to build a metro rail network along with a smart city project, which is supposed to be going on in the port city of Chittagong. This, obviously, we know that the target remains the port, as a matter of fact. And let me tell you, the crux point here is that the Chinese are offering to build this entire metro rail network with their own money and are offering a joint share project with the Bangladeshis to kind of, take this particular dream of theirs forward. There's an anonymous internet hacker user, whatever you may want to call it, called China Dan. Now, this gentleman has hacked some Chinese database and has got information of about 1 billion Chinese nationals, including their names, addresses, birthplace, national ID numbers, mobile numbers, crime cases, so on and so forth. And he's offering to sell this on the dark web. This is about 23 terabytes, and he's planning to sell this for 10 bitcoins. That's about $200,000. This was, basically stolen from the Shanghai National Police database, which was hacked sometime in 2022, early 2022. TikTok, which was banned in India a long time back, and a lot of fervor that was created by a lot of TikTok users within India, although it has died down. The same was tried in USA, but was cut short because of some legality issue that the TikTok as a company had filed within the States. Now, TikTok's chief executive, by the way, let me just preface here by saying that TikTok was being banned because of security concerns, because of its ability of mining data from its users and sending it back to China. So TikTok chief executive Zhao Zishu said recently that China-based employees can access user data of United States citizens with regard certain information, including public videos and comments, which are happening on the page of the users. Now, this is something that the Chinese have been vehemently denying since the time these allegations have been put up. But now this particular statement tells us the reality. USA has been trying hard, and this particular thing depends on their battle with China, where they've been trying hard to try out their hypersonic missiles, and especially after the successful demonstration of this missile by the Russians in Ukraine, the tests have been going at super speed. The recent test that was conducted failed, and the statement says, as I read, US hypersonic test fails amongst mounted pressure from China, Russia, and North Korea. And Navy Lieutenant Commander Tim Gorman from the Department of Defense says an anomaly occurred following the ignition and the test of the asset. Puts a bit of dent on US confidence, doesn't it? Uh, Coming towards the end of this particular video, I'd like to talk about the partners in Blue Pacific. Now, this is an initiative that was taken out, sometime again during the NATO and G7 summits. This talks about US and its allies, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and the United Kingdom, where they're going to be trying to work towards reducing Chinese aggressive push within the small island nations in the Pacific Ocean. It's interesting, this sort of a thing is happening on the backdrop of the failure of the Chinese diplomatic efforts to kind of make a security agreement with about 11 or 12 nations within that region. The Chinese again know and are taking lessons from the Ukraine war, and I've kind of discussed this in detail in a couple of videos. The recent one that I've put out with General Shaukin Chauhan, have a look at it. It talks about the various feasibility factors or the various things that the Chinese are doing, preparing for their invasion in Taiwan. The Chinese Defense Ministry recently announced that the PLA has successfully conducted the 6 tests of its land-based anti-ballistic missile system on the 19th of June within the country's borders. This is basically done with an eye, as the Chinese explain, with an eye on preventing nuclear mishaps taking place within the region, looking at India, South Korea, and United States all being nuclear powers surrounding China. This also puts an eye on the Taiwanese missile systems, where the Taiwanese have been claiming that they've got enough and more missiles to actually hit Beijing. And probably the Chinese are looking at creating a system to have some sort of a protection for their cities, because in an event of an invasion of Taiwan, I think that is what the Taiwanese would be to try and threaten the eastern prosperous coast of China. That's all from me for now for China. I thank you so much for watching these videos. Although it's a new segment that I've tried, I hope that it gains traction. I'd love to know how you all are feeling about, or what you want to see more within these videos. I'm also trying to work on a segment wherein, especially for China, with General Shankar, I'm going to be discussing these news in a little more detail and analyzing the impact of these news items. Till then, please do support my channel by either becoming a member or clicking on the thanks button and supporting me. Also, like, comment, subscribe to my channel, share my videos with your friends and family. Until next time, Jai Hind.